I'm Elena Brooks, 34, standing in front of a rooftop mirror, adjusting a dress I didn't wear for them. Outside, Chicago glows like it's rooting for someone else. That's fine. I didn't come to be seen. I came because silence stopped serving me. Behind me, the hum of jazz and clinking glasses echoes through a party I never asked to be invited to. Noah and Sophia's engagement celebration, printed in gold foil on an invitation that landed in my inbox like a dare. But what they didn't know was that Sophia already knew me. Not through family dinners or staged group photos, but through a name I never signed. A voice I lent to strangers when I thought mine didn't matter. And now, tonight, in front of all of them, she's about to return that voice in a way no one expects. Not to expose me, but to honor me. Before I tell you what happened on that rooftop, when the microphone shifted and the spotlight finally followed, tell me this. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who misjudged you and let them learn who you are without saying a word? Drop me in the comments if you've ever been erased and came back brighter. And subscribe, because some stories aren't told loudly. They're told clearly. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I always did, especially when it's about me. The voice memo crackled through the speakers of my phone, the smugness in Noah's voice as sharp as ever. And she practically begged me to invite her. I mean, come on. It's not a charity case, it's an engagement party. I paused the audio and stared at the frozen waveform on my screen. My thumb hovered above the play button, but I didn't need to hear it again. I could recite it in my sleep. I already had. 5 years of sleepwalking through their disappointments had trained me well. Back then, it was, let Noah shine, Elena. Don't take up so much space. Now it was, she's flat broke. Nice upgrade. Outside, spring sun hit the edges of my blinds, making faint horizontal lines on the whiteboard wall across from me. Q2 goals was still written in blue marker from last month, though I'd hit them weeks ago. I was supposed to be planning my next phase, maybe taking time off. But instead, I was staring down an invitation that felt more like a dare than a gesture of goodwill. The message had landed in the Brooks family group chat at 8:02 a.m., complete with a sparkly Canva card reading, Noah and Sophia's engagement celebration, May 18, 6 p.m., the Lancaster estate. Then came the voice memo, obviously intended for Susan and Thomas, but sent to everyone by mistake. Classic Noah. Even his slip-ups are polished. I leaned back into the graphite gray couch and blinked slowly, letting the warmth of my tea anchor me. No reaction. No texts of apology. Just silence from the family chat. Not even a hasty oops. They never corrected him when the target was me. The truth? I didn't beg to come. I hadn't said a word about the party. I hadn't even replied to the invite. And I certainly didn't need free wine and lukewarm smiles from relatives who'd made it very clear whose name deserved to be spotlighted. Still. I opened my laptop, tabs already remembering my habits. Muscle memory kicked in. LinkedIn. Sophia Lancaster. Her profile popped up in the top search result. Co-founder, Impact Rise. Harvard MPA. Advisory Board, TED Midwest. Curated. Elegant. Market ready. I skimmed her timeline. She'd spoken at youth mentorship panels, advocated for underrepresented tech founders. There, buried halfway down her feed, was a blog post titled The Mentor I Never Met, with a generic stock image of an open notebook and tea. I clicked. She probably has no idea I ever existed, but her anonymous notes got me through the hardest moments of building my first nonprofit. I never got to thank her. I hope someday I will. My chest tightened. The phrasing wasn't what got me. It was the cadence. I'd read those words before, because I'd written the original document that inspired them. 5 years ago, I'd started a mentorship initiative using a pseudonym, the North Star Project. I didn't want recognition. I wanted results. One of the first mentees had emailed me a thank you note signed with just initials, SL, Sophia Lancaster. I minimized the tab and pulled open an old folder buried in my archive, mentorship/letters/2019. The document opened like a time capsule. You don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. What you wrote about quiet builders made me stay when I was ready to walk away. SL. I exhaled slowly, staring at those two letters. SL. My fingers curled around the ceramic mug in my hands. Warm, but trembling slightly. Sophia Lancaster knew me. Not through family, not through Noah, but through a moment I'd forgotten I ever created. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't charity. I walked to the window, my gaze stretching past the skyline of downtown Chicago, glass towers shimmering like chess pieces mid-match. My voice came out in a whisper, laced with something between curiosity and reckoning. So, that's how you know me. My seat at the dinner table was still there, but I wasn't part of the conversation. The silverware clinked softly against the china, the kind of controlled politeness that coated the air like static. Susan had gone with her usual roast lamb, garlic mashed potatoes, and asparagus that looked like it had been plated by a food stylist. Everything was curated, from the floral centerpiece to the jazz playlist humming low in the background. It could have been a magazine spread titled, "How to Host the Perfect Family Dinner." Except I wasn't part of the feature. Noah was mid-story, arms moving like he was narrating a TED Talk. And that's when the investor looked me in the eye and said, "You don't need us? We need you." He let the words hang, smugness radiating off him like heat. Susan's laugh came too quickly. "That's our Noah," she said, her hand fluttering to her chest like she'd won something. Thomas nodded absently, sipping his wine, clearly half listening, probably thinking about golf scores or quarterly statements. He hadn't asked me a single question since I walked in. Sophia sat diagonally across from me, polite smile in place. But her eyes? They moved with intention, observing, measuring. I reached for the water jug just as Noah leaned forward, voice suddenly louder. "Elena, how's that consulting thing going? Still working with those nonprofits?" I met his eyes. "Still working, yes." He grinned. "Good for you. Meaningful stuff. Not always profitable, but hey, passion projects, right?" Susan chimed in quickly, smoothing over the tension with practiced sweetness. "Don't bring up work, dear. It'll only make you uncomfortable." I set the water jug down, a little too firmly. Sophia's gaze flicked between us. "I actually read about Project Step 1 recently," she said lightly, turning to me. "Didn't it start in Chicago around 2018? Anonymous mentorship for underserved founders?" I nodded. "Sounds familiar." She tilted her head slightly. That idea always stuck with me. The whole quiet builder concept, ahead of its time. Noah leaned back, unimpressed. Sophia's always had a soft spot for obscure startups. She likes the underdog story. Susan laughed again. "Well, let's not bore ourselves with business talk. More dessert, anyone?" Sophia didn't drop it. "Did you ever have anything to do with it?" she asked, her voice casual but her gaze anchored to mine. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Why do you ask?" She paused. Just for a second. It was enough. Her expression shifted, a flicker of understanding. "I just thought—" Her voice trailed off, but the rest didn't need to be said. The rest of the night passed in a blur of coffee refills and surface-level chatter. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. When it was time to leave, I lingered by the hallway mirror while they gathered coats. Sophia stepped aside, tapping her phone. Her face was unreadable, but the movement was precise. A minute later, just before the front door closed behind me, I heard the faint buzz of a message sent. It's her. I'm sure of it. Engagement parties are supposed to be about love, but tonight someone's about to fall out of it. The rooftop glimmered under 1,000 soft lights strung between pergolas and glass panels, giving everything a filtered glow, like the world had been airbrushed for one perfect evening. Waiters moved like shadows, offering trays of champagne and canapes, while a live quartet played a mellow jazz version of Can't Help Falling in Love. Chicago stretched beyond the railing, a twinkling witness. I stood alone, dressed in black. A deliberate choice. Everyone else floated in pastels and polished smiles, but I had no desire to blend in. The contrast suited me. Noah moved through the crowd like a man who believed the evening was an ode to himself. Flashbulbs caught his profile. Friends patted his shoulder. Influencers circled him like he was the event. And maybe he was. Until now. Elena. He approached with theatrical warmth, glass in hand. Didn't think you'd actually come? The food must have been tempting. A few people nearby chuckled, awkward but obedient. I didn't flinch. You always were good at making meals about yourself. He laughed, a beat too loud, then waved someone over. Be sure to get a photo of us. My sister's finally shown up for a free meal. The photographer hesitated. Sophia appeared at his side. I'll take it from here, she said, voice calm but edged with something steely. Noah blinked. Babe, what are you... But she was already climbing the small platform where the mic waited. The music dimmed. Conversations stilled. Sophia took the microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight. I know this was meant to be a celebration of love, of beginnings, of futures. She glanced at Noah. But before we toast to that, I'd like to honor someone else. Someone who changed my future. A ripple moved through the crowd. She turned slowly and pointed to me. That woman right there. Murmurs broke out. Glasses stilled midair. Noah's brow furrowed. Sophia, what is this? She didn't look at him. Most of you don't know this, she continued, her voice steady. But years ago, I applied for a mentorship program under an alias. I was lost, raw, uncertain of my path. And one person, anonymously, changed everything. A pause. She nominated me for opportunities I didn't believe I deserved. She coached me through rejections I never shared aloud. And she did it without ever asking for credit. The air thickened. A guest near the back whispered, Who is she talking about? Sophia's voice softened. I found her again recently. By accident. But it wasn't luck. It was grace. Because Elena Brooks is not the failure you've painted her to be. She is the blueprint I followed. The reason I'm standing here. And the reason I'm walking away. Noah stepped forward. This isn't funny. She turned to him for the first time. Neither was the way you spoke about her. Not tonight. Not for years. Another voice rose from the side, a guest clutching their phone. Wait, is she the woman speaking at TED next week? The one behind step 1? A hush, then a gasp. My face stayed neutral, but my heartbeat was a drumline. Sophia reached for her hand, slipped off the engagement ring, and without a word, set it gently on the microphone stand. And then she walked. Not away from the crowd, but through it. Past stares, past whispers, past Noah. Straight toward the version of herself she refused to betray. It took one quiet decision to unravel Noah's entire performance. And it wasn't mine. The applause had stopped, but the echoes of what Sophia said still clung to the night like dew. The rooftop had become a theater of stunned expressions and urgent whispers. Waiters slowed their pace, unsure whether to keep serving champagne or start collecting shattered illusions. I stood exactly where I'd been, unmoved, unreadable. The spotlight had shifted, but I hadn't taken a single step forward. I didn't need to. Noah stormed past me, his perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled, jaw clenched. Sophia, he barked, but the elevator doors were already closing behind her. She didn't look back. Her silhouette shrank into a steel reflection, and then she was gone. He slammed his palm against the call button. Useless. His voice cracked as he muttered something under his breath. From across the room, I saw Susan frantically waving at Thomas to do something. Anything. Elena, Thomas said, approaching me, his voice low but sharp, like he was used to commands being obeyed. Fix this. You know people in the press. You still have connections. I met his eyes. Fix what? He hesitated. You know exactly what I mean. I do, I said. And that's the problem. Before he could respond, a small cluster of reporters, influencers really, the kind who live for drama over data, drifted toward me, cameras at the ready. Elena Brooks, is it true you're the founder behind Step One? Were you really Sophia Lancaster's mentor? Did you know she planned to call off the engagement tonight? I smiled. Not wide, just enough. I think the night speaks for itself, I said. That was all they got. I turned and walked. Through the tension, through the open mouths and dropped glasses. Some part of me expected Susan to grab my arm, hiss something about family dignity. She didn't. She looked like someone watching a house collapse and realizing she'd helped build it on sand. The hallway outside was cooler, quieter. The music had long since stopped. I pulled my phone from my clutch, expecting chaos. Instead, there was a single message. Sophia Lancaster. Thank you for letting me speak first. You didn't have to. I stared at it for a moment, thumbs motionless, then typed, You earned it. Back in my apartment, the skyline felt different. Less like a wall of judgment and more like a constellation of possibilities. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine. I wanted to remember this clearly. The inbox pinged. TED team subject. Elena Brooks, From the Shadows to the Spotlight. I opened it slowly. There it was, the promo reel. My name, my face, the story finally centered. And this time, no one could talk over it. Not even Noah. People say nothing is louder than silence. I disagree. Guilt screams louder. The house in Evanston was unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The other kind. The kind that follows a power outage when everything halts mid-motion and no one's sure what comes next. I wasn't there, but I could picture it perfectly. Susan folding the newspaper 3 times more than necessary. Thomas staring at the untouched coffee growing cold beside his phone. Noah pacing, his designer socks muffling panic across hardwood floors. The morning headlines didn't help. From outcast to icon, TED confirms Elena Brooks as keynote speaker. Fiancée walks out mid-speech, cites stolen spotlight. Family startup crumbles as co-founder faces PR nightmare. I didn't need to read beyond the headlines. I'd already lived the article. My office downtown was unusually warm. Or maybe that was just the sunlight pouring through the wide windows. There was something soothing about the clack of my keyboard and the silence of not having to explain myself. My inbox was a mixed bag. Press inquiries, speaking invites, a sudden flurry of LinkedIn connections. I ignored most of it. Then came the text from Thomas. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we were. I stared at it, thumb hovering. He hadn't signed it with Dad. He hadn't used my name, but he had used we. That was new. Still, I didn't reply. 3 soft knocks on the glass wall broke my rhythm. Sophia stood there, her posture tentative, hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup like it was an apology. I didn't want to call, she said when I let her in. Didn't know if I was allowed. You're here, I said, gesturing to the seat across from mine. For a moment, she just sat, taking in the space. The minimalist design, the absence of family photos. Then she looked at me with a strange softness. I admired you before I ever met you, she said. I read every article you ghost wrote, every project you touched. You were the reason I started in this field. I didn't know that, I said. I never told you, she nodded. I didn't think it would matter to someone like you. I smiled. And now? Now I think it matters more than ever. There was a quiet between us, not the heavy kind that needed filling, but the kind that honored what had been said. You were the one who nominated me for that TED board, she added. I tilted my head. You found out? She shook her head. I suspected. Then someone forwarded me the original application. I checked the IP Chicago. Then I checked your old Gmail handle. Len Brooks Step 1. That was you. I exhaled, Not in surprise. In confirmation. You're not just who they said you were, Elena. You're more. The world sees you now. But, she hesitated. Do you? I didn't answer. I looked out the window at the skyline, not for answers, but for space. Sometimes silence isn't a verdict. Sometimes it's just the pause before a truth becomes real. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was standing. The red circle beneath my feet felt like home and fire at once. Lights warmed my skin, but it wasn't nerves that pricked beneath them. It was clarity. All around me, rows and rows of faces waited, eyes trained forward. Somewhere behind the cameras, there were millions more. Watching. Listening. Not for a scandal, not for a headline, but for me. I inhaled once. Then I began. My name is Elena Brooks, and I used to believe that value came from being seen, that if you weren't in the photo, if your name wasn't in the credits, you hadn't mattered. I let the pause stretch, not from fear, but from ownership. I believed that because that's how I was raised. Stay small. Don't stir the waters. Applause belongs to the loudest, and dignity, well, that belongs to the ones who can stomach being invisible. Somewhere in the front row, Sophia wiped a tear. Her presence was a promise kept, silent but unshakable. I continued. I built things in silence, teams, platforms, pathways. I gave credit to others. I backed away from microphones. I told myself it was noble. But truthfully, I was afraid. A soft murmur moved through the room, not disruption, but resonance. Afraid that if I stood in the light, someone would push me out of it. I looked into the camera, into the future. But here's what I learned. Light isn't a spotlight. It's a torch. And when you pass it, without asking anything in return, it burns brighter, not smaller. They were listening now. Really listening. I didn't win by fighting. I didn't take revenge. I didn't drag anyone down to lift myself up. I just refused to kneel. Silence, then a thunderous rising applause. Backstage, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I sat in the green room, breathing in the quiet, letting it fill all the places I used to shrink. There was a knock. One of the TED organizers stepped in, holding a sleek black envelope. We'd like to feature you on the main stage next year, she said, if you're willing. I took the letter, not as proof, not as validation, but as something mine. Noah would watch. So would Susan and Thomas. Maybe they'd say something. Maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't waiting to be invited. I had arrived. They had spent years weaving a narrative in which Elena was either absent or irrelevant, a silent footnote in their grand success story. But on the night her voice echoed across the TED stage, that illusion collapsed. Not in an explosion, not in vengeance, but in the quiet, irreversible force of truth unveiled. The same parents who once whispered, "She lacks ambition," now watched her from behind a screen they weren't invited to join in person. The brother who mocked her as a failure now scrambled to secure a meeting with investors who no longer returned his calls. And Sophia, once engaged to that illusion, stood in the front row, not as a fiancée, but as a witness. To the real story. To the one who had been written out and then returned with her own pen. Elena never raised her voice. She never fought fire with fire. She simply stood still long enough for everyone else's masks to melt under their own spotlight. What made the moment satisfying wasn't just the fall of those who betrayed her. It was the calm with which she reclaimed space they once told her she didn't deserve. The irony was poetic. Noah wanted fame, but it found Elena. Thomas sought control, but lost all grip. Susan begged for appearances, but now faced an audience she couldn't deceive. In their attempt to erase her, they had accidentally drawn a spotlight around her absence. And once she stepped into it, there was no turning back. Her victory wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was in the emails flooding in from strangers who had also been told they were too quiet, too plain, or too much. It was in the sponsors pulling out of Noah's venture. It was in the look of stunned reverence on Sophia's face, and the silence, oh, the silence, on the family group chat. Justice didn't roar. It whispered Elena's name through every channel they once thought too lofty for her. She had risen not by demanding attention, but by mastering her craft in the dark. And when the world finally turned its gaze, it wasn't to see her revenge. It was to recognize her resilience. This wasn't just about a family reunion gone wrong. It was about every boardroom where a woman's ideas were claimed by louder men. Every Thanksgiving where accomplishments were measured in degrees, not dignity. Every "you should be more like your brother" that buried potential beneath tradition. Elena's rise was more than personal. It was symbolic. A quiet reminder that sometimes the most devastating rebuttal is not a scream. It's success. And that no wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Perhaps the deepest lesson wasn't about retaliation. It was about restraint. She could have exposed the emails. She could have humiliated Noah with the receipts she had archived for years. But she didn't. Because true power doesn't beg to be seen. It lets others crumble when they realize they can no longer ignore it. Her story didn't end with applause. It began with it. And so, when the world clapped, Elena didn't bow. She simply stood, unmoved, unbothered, unforgettable. Because when injustice is met with unwavering dignity, the final verdict doesn't echo in courtrooms. It echoes in legacies. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or told that your story wasn't worth telling, this is your reminder. You don't need permission to exist in full color. You don't need a family's approval to leave a legacy. You just need to keep standing. Elena didn't rise by fighting fire with fire. She rose by refusing to kneel. And maybe that's you too. Quietly building, healing, outlasting. So if you've ever felt invisible but chose grace instead of bitterness, drop a candle emoji in the comments. Let someone else know they're not alone in the quiet. And if stories like this speak to the part of you that's still healing, subscribe. Because some of us were never meant to be the loudest in the room. We were meant to be the ones who rewrote the ending. Quietly, powerfully, on our own terms. You've spent your whole life thinking you were abandoned, but the truth is, no one ever chose you in the first place. You weren't forgotten. You were never important enough to remember. That's what my sister said, right in front of everyone, and no one objected. My mother simply set down her glass and sighed. We gave you chances. But you always find a way to make things uncomfortable. And that's when I knew. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had chosen to erase me from their story. If you've ever been pushed out of your own family's narrative, compared, blamed, or silenced just because you weren't who they wanted, stay with me. Because this story is for those of us who were treated like the problem, instead of part of the family. The air outside the Warren estate was humid and still, the kind of thick silence that settled before a storm. Inside, the mood wasn't much different. Stale grief mingled with polished perfection. The overcast sky cast a silver sheen on the marble floors, and the cold, polished silverware laid out for a reception that no one really cared about. I hadn't been back here in 3 years. Not since the Thanksgiving where Mom said I should be more like Sam. Not since I realized that trying to belong in this family meant handing over every shred of myself. Today, I was here for Grandpa. Or at least, what was left of him. His name engraved on a mahogany box and a family gathering full of strategic condolences. Sam was already there, glowing in her ivory dress like she'd walked out of a New England bridal catalog. Mom and Dad hovered near her, proud smiles fixed like mask glue. I watched from the corner of the parlor, the one nearest the liquor cart. No one looked at me. Not really. Aunt Maureen nodded stiffly. Cousin Dean gave a brief, uncertain smile before drifting off with someone more politically useful. The rest whispered and grazed over hors d'oeuvres like actors waiting for their cues. Grandpa once handed me a small wooden box and said,